Enemy of the state.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the state.
Dank Pod Stash.
You're listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Pod Stash. The Pod Stash is available on YouTube, SoundCloud, and everywhere else podcasts are found. Let us know where you want to listen, and we'll release there as well.
If you want to help us improve the podcast, check out our shops at blackmarketmemes.threadless.com and dankpodstash.threadless.com. Links will be provided. Anything you buy helps us make the Pod Stash better. Business owners and creators, advertise on the Dank Pod Stash. Reach a larger audience, make more sales. Email us at dankpodstash@gmail.com for details.
Washington State listeners, please check out Washington State Anarchists and Libertarians Facebook group. Help us expand the Agora face to face. Welcome to episode 24 of Enemy of the State's Dank Pod Stash. I'm your co-host, Nick, and I'm here as usual with David Ballantyne. How's it going, bud?
It's marginally magnificent. It could be better, it could be worse, but it is what it is.
Yes.
Talking with Hex today about a slew of things. Sounds like he wanted to get into some Green Agorism, a little bit of
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, Green Agorism, something I haven't heard about, but I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. But beforehand, I think we wanted to get into some current events. So what do you have to say about that, Nick?
Well, it's, I don't know, just another fucking tragedy in the world. Another mass shooting down there in New Zealand, in Christchurch, New Zealand, where at least one person shot up a mosque and killed 49 people with dozens more injured. And everyone's seen the story by now. There's a video floating around, a 70-page manifesto by the shooter. And if you look further into it, I mean, the first thing that popped up in my head was to check out Pol. And, of course, Pol is on fire. You know, going both ways, because Pol is what it is. Either praise for what he did or, you know, not many people, you know, saying that's a bad thing, which is shitty. But there are some insights on there, and apparently he was around Pol quite a bit in those kind of circles. So, but yeah, there's some pretty wide-ranging implications in my mind just from everything about this. One of the things that stands out a lot is how quickly government scrambled to get social media to scrub the video and the manifesto from online anywhere.
Yeah, I've seen some of the videos. As I have one that I have downloaded that they can't remove, and I had the manifesto. We were looking into that. At least I was. I know you got that link too. But almost immediately after getting it, they took it down, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. The thing about that really gets me the most is that why are they scrubbing this? Why are they censoring anything, first of all, but something like this, when people want answers to the situation? And the obvious answer is to get their spin on it, their narrative out there, so people can't research it for themselves.
Exactly. I think that's exactly why they're doing it. And it's also evidence to me as to it not being like an orchestrated false flag. I know I've seen a lot of that. It's been bothering me on Facebook, other social media. You know, the armchair analysts coming out and saying that, you know, this is what it is. And somehow, you know, they haven't even watched the videos or read the manifesto or looked into many of the details, but they already know that it is a false flag and was orchestrated, and saying that these poor people were crisis actors and using things like, oh, well, there wasn't enough blood, or, you know, why is this guy on his phone? Well, first of all, he's on his phone because, at least me, the first thing I'm going to want to do if I survive something like that is contact my loved ones and say, hey, I'm alive and I want to talk to you because I'm terrified.
And you're referencing that screenshot of the person laying on the ground looking at their phone inside of a mosque, right?
Yeah, and there's a few screenshots like that,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole thing with the blood and there's not enough gore, and it's like, your knowledge base on this is probably from playing Call of Duty.
Right.
So I'm really not going to listen to anything you have to say, because when you look at these real incidents, when you look at even like wartime footage and like, there's places you can go on the internet to find really gory stuff. When people get shot, like, it's not like blood splattering everywhere, and it really depends upon if a main artery was hit, where they were hit, this and that. Somebody was saying that, the dude who got hit in the head, who looked still alive, like, how could he still be alive? You can get shot in the head and be still alive.
Sure.
Like, yeah. Let's hear some of Hex's thoughts on this.
To be honest, I haven't really seen much except a little bit of the footage. I understand that he was an ethno-nationalist to some degree, or I've heard a lot of different things coming out about it. I even heard a little bit over the radio over, God, I hate to say it. One of my coworkers listens to Rush Limbaugh, and he had some thoughts on it. And so I hear a lot of different things as to why he did it. I even understand that he shouted out to PewDiePie at some point during the whole thing. Although I'm not sure how true that was, or if that was just a meme that was.
I saw that. That was 100% true. He said.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, at the very beginning of the video, I believe he said, "All right, lads, remember to subscribe to PewDiePie," and PewDiePie has come out. If I'm saying that right, I don't even know who the fuck that is, really, but he's come out on Twitter saying this has nothing to do with me. I don't condone this. I'm against this. So people are just, I think, grasping at different things, and I'm not aware of PewDiePie's history with I don't know if you want to say the alt-right what the fuck ever, but apparently there's been some sympathetic stuff from him with that. So
well, you know how people are
sympathetic. Even as a left-winger, I'll admit that I think that a lot of it was mostly just him joking, and it went a little bit too far. What had happened essentially was he used a certain slur for black people in one of his videos without really thinking about it. And then people started calling him alt-right and different things.
Okay.
And then he made an apology about it a little, but he threw some humor in there with it. And so they're like, oh, well, he's not really being serious. But I think he was just trying to be himself while at the same time, being very genuinely apologetic. I could be wrong about it.
Sure.
But anyway, with the shooter, so I understand that a lot of the stuff that's in that manifesto, Valentine, I don't know if you've read it in its entirety because you said that it got taken down pretty quickly. What I've heard is that it's just kind of a mangled mess, essentially, of different ideas. And so for that reason, a lot of people are saying that that this guy basically started out kind of as a troll, but like it went outside the internet. And so that he has, obviously he already has a lot of mental issues. But what exactly is in that manifesto? Or do we not really want to get into that?
I don't fully know. I didn't get a chance to read it myself. My girlfriend was, I had just watched the video, so I was a little shaken up, and I was like, well, I'm going to put it off. I don't want to dive too deep into that and just really, mess with my own head, take a break here and then look at it. But she was looking at it, and while she was looking at it, it got taken down. But it just looked like, at least the beginning, she got into the Q&A section of it, and it was just a bunch of ramblings. And
so yeah, that's on the surface, and I haven't read the whole thing. I've seen bits and pieces, and I found a very interesting thread of a deep analyzation of the manifesto on poll. And what some people are going with is that, first of all, he included the Q&A section as a way to control the media's narrative, because all their questions that they wanted to ask about it were pretty much covered in there. And that also his manifesto was a bit of a subversion, because he mentioned things that are not, a lot of his views in the manifesto that are not conducive with the white nationalist whatever narrative. And people are saying that he did this in order to stir up a media frenzy and to direct things in the way that he wanted them to go, as far as, I believe, his ultimate goal of starting or furthering a race war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The one thing that I remember I saw briefly in it, I think it actually was from the Q&A section that you're talking about, that he didn't have an issue with people in their separate places, but if they tried to like quote unquote force like a diverse community or nation or fucking whatnot, that they were his enemy and whatnot. And it just kind of reminds me of the whole white genocide narrative,
Sure.
which is the idea that if you race mix, you're destroying the white race, which to me is just really a bizarre thing because it doesn't really matter um, which race comes out on top, if you will, because in the end we're all the human race, and there's not enough diverse difference that it's going to matter if we have eventually one very diverse group of people to the point where like everybody is some different tiny mixture of something else. And in some ways it actually is more healthy for that to be the case. And it's just the mindset of a white nationalist to me is so bizarre because they try to use science with it, but science doesn't help them in any way. It's it's so weird. I wish to some degree that I could get inside their brain, and at the same time it'd be too fucking messed up, I'm sure, for me to want to come back from that.
Sure.
I don't know. Sorry, little rant.
Sure.
They use science to try and find some kind of rationalization, and almost realistically in an appeal to authority, so they can be like, see, science says that I'm right, instead of having to face their wrong opinions.
And science ain't a god, first of all. If you're like involved with science very much, you'll realize that it's just as faulty as people are, and it's wrong all the time, and it's right a lot of the time as well. It's just a matter of observing and then checking to see if that observation is right in a certain way, and it's always going to be biased in some direction. So you're always going to have some fucking study that agrees with you or something that agrees with somebody else. It's just weird.
Yeah.
I have a sister who's a scientist. I forget what exactly she's involved with. It's sea biology in some way. But she has a lot of friends who are in different parts of the scientific community, and just trying to get inside their head is weird to me. I don't know. Sorry if I ramble a little bit. I'm a little bit high right now, so it's not helping. Yeah. Go on anyway.
It's all good.
Right in on that.
Yeah, we got a big ramble fest going on, but no, that's good. You mentioned the shooter's problem with forced integration, and that's a thing I've seen coming up quite a bit. We all know there's a big argument and people taking different sides on the idea of forced migration throughout different parts of the world, and then forced integration, and all of this perpetuated by different governments. And people don't like that. So as I was thinking about this whole situation, it seems that incidents like this, which have happened in the past in different places, also targeting Muslim populations in areas that are not predominantly Muslim, I would imagine westernized areas, it seems like a symptom of that. And it's not the correct way, obviously, for anybody to go, but it's a deranged mind's way of acting out against it. That was one thought that came up.
There's a lot of people who try to argue to some... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I really detest the kind of people who argue that this is really a forced integration, because this is just kind of how people migrate, and I feel like it'd be a lot more diverse if the government were to just kind of let loose and do stuff. Now, obviously, if you want to do with your freedom of association, if you want to all kind of conjoin into like one white community, great, because I don't really want to be involved with that.
Sure.
If you're the kind of person who wants to separate yourself from any kind of different thinking, that's not for me. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of racism simply comes from the fact that people already kind of are doing that and using certain what's the fucking law I'm thinking of where they can make gated communities and stuff and use the state to defend that. I don't really fucking know. Anyway, a lot of racism comes from the fact that the government is involved and that there is force involved with making these kind of communities in which people can do that, and also from the fact that the fucking police themselves also back this up. Because I know this is going to sound, this is where my more left ideas come into play rather. But there has been shown to be a massive infiltration of the KKK into police forces. And so they are directing violence in a way that befits white supremacy. And so not only are they doing that, but they're allowing certain groups to, I lost my train of thought. You get the idea of where I'm going with that though, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so it just disturbs me that libertarians try to hop on the train of freedom of association when freedom of association is the entire reason why we have racism in the first place. And I'm sure that if it weren't for the Jim Crow laws and shit that allowed the segregation to be there in the first place and not have people interacting with each other like normal fucking human beings, people would be a lot less racist anyway. It's the state that is the creator, the instigator, and the perpetuator of racism. It's not a libertarian idea to be separating yourself. It's
No, I totally get what you're saying.
Probably can't see it on this end, but I was going Alex Jones there for a little bit.
They already fucking did it, Bravo. They already fucking did it. They already forced us to integrate. We can't have our
government's turning the friggin' frogs gay.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, it's a whole convoluted mess. But to bring it back, it's just a terrible thing that all these people lost their lives. It's a terrible thing when any terrorist attack or anything like that claims people's lives, and it's not fighting what they think they're fighting as far as the let's say in this case the white nationalists or whoever they are fighting Muslim extremists. They become the exact same thing. So it's a vicious cycle. We see it in the state bombing different places in the Middle East everywhere and radicalizing more people, and the cycle needs to be broken. There needs to be a better way found. So condolences to the families and everybody involved on the victim side there.
Definitely. It's not a fun thing to watch. Like, watching that video was heart-wrenching.
Yeah, it's rough. I don't see how anyone can say it's fake after watching that. But getting out of that, and there was something another little bit of a current event we were thinking about talking about. It's not a big deal at all. Definitely not on the same level of magnitude as this. But there's been some memes flying around, some really good memes of Tom Woods putting his foot in his mouth, talking about normalizing sex work. And comparing that to forced skiing lessons. And you know what he has what he has tried to explain about this is that normalizing I mean, I don't even understand exactly what he was trying to explain. Something about how that normalizing sex work is not good for, I would imagine, his ideal society, because societies throughout time, according to him, have punished forced sex work more severely than most other crimes. Now, tell me if you can make heads or tails of that, because I don't see the connection between letting people have voluntary sex work interactions.
He was conflating, basically he was conflating the black market with the red market. He was conflating voluntary sex work with sex trafficking, and, you know, the things that go along with that. Trying to say that, you know, it's it's basically normalizing rape, when no, not at all. A lot of he clearly doesn't understand what a lot of sex work is. Some sex work is, you know, you going and having sex with somebody and getting paid. Some sex work is cam work on the internet. Like, clearly he doesn't understand the nuances of that. And yes, sex trafficking is horrible. If sex work was more normalized, there would be a lot less sex trafficking. I don't understand how he could have similar views on the drug war. You know what I mean? With legalizing things would make the bad elements of that, you know, less powerful, and not understand that it would do the same with prostitution and sex work. I just don't understand it.
I don't either. That's bizarre. That is weird. I saw a lot of memes for it, but I didn't know what the origin of it was.
The thing that pisses me off about it is it has emboldened people who like to put their really objective moral like opinion about sex itself. It has emboldened them to think that, well, see, this guy agrees with me, so sex is sacred. Like, nobody should have sex unless it's in the certain circumstances that I say, which is fucking ridiculous.
Right. Yeah, and I think that was the knee-jerk reaction from him. Was like, oh, they're talking about sexual things that make me uncomfortable in my worldview. I got to find a way to make a statement against this. And he was 100% wrong also by when he said that in every past society, rape has been treated harshly, more harsh than forced skiing lessons or anything like that. That's bullshit. In the Bible, I believe, in if not the Bible, it's somewhere in one of the ancient religions. If a woman is raped, she then is forced to marry her rapist, and it's like, oh yeah, totally harsh punishment for rape there.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
I think I know what you're referring to. Shit, I've never quite understood that one. I have heard that was more of a really shitty translation of what it was actually trying to say, more than anything. But I would have to look into that a little bit more. But yeah, I agree with you. What Tom Woods is saying is it's not related to the reality of what happens with sex work in any manner. Not that I have involved myself with that, either being a consumer or a seller of it. But from what little I've talked with people in agorist communities who are sex workers, yeah, I would agree that is not the reality of the situation at all.
Absolutely. Well, there are still places in the world where a rape victim is stoned for having been a part of it as well. So I just think he's completely off base in every way there. Yeah. So that was funny to begin with and turned kind of serious at the end, trying to lighten things up a bit, but that's okay. We're going to go into...
right here.
What's that?
Subscribe to my premium Snapchat, everyone.
There it is.
I get that.
Well, let's jump into the meat and potatoes here. We got some interesting stuff from Hex. What did you want to bring to us today, Hex?
Sure. So I'm Hex. I am one of the workers in Gray Man Design. I am also one of the co-organizers for Agora Fest, and I'm going to be working with a journal called The Counter-Economist in the future. I am a left market anarchist and a green agorist. And I don't know if y'all had a question for me, if I can just kind of jump right in to explain what green agorism is.
Let's jump right in.
Go ahead and jump right in.
So green agorism essentially is the idea that we can use counter-economics in a way that both interacts perfectly with nature and is low waste, is, as I said, integrated with nature already. I did say that.
Yep.
And is environmentally friendly. I've also heard the term free market environmentalism. There was another term that I've heard before. It's very heavily aligned with a movement called solar punk, in which they utilize technology to further create a more green, a more environmentally friendly world, and also co-aligns with a lot of left anarchist ideas. I am, as I said, involved with the solar front community. And so some of my ideas, because they tend to be more heavily left than I am, I bring a lot of ideas to the table that they normally hadn't thought of before. For example, a lot of them are anti-market for the idea that capitalism itself, which they tend to conflate with markets. I do not do that at all. The idea that capitalism itself is unsustainable. And I agree that central planning is not bad simply on a force level, but I also believe that central planning is disastrous on a private level. Because when you have central planning, you have one person's opinion essentially moving on everybody else. And a lot of hierarchy that exists currently in the market is simply due to the way that the government is picking winners and losers. I believe that if it were not for the state privileges that are granted to big capital, especially groups like Walmart and Target and different places like Boeing that use massive amounts of subsidies, we would see a market-based movement towards heavy decentralization, which is not just to the point of small businesses, as anarcho-capitalists tend to go towards, but I want to go further with that. I want to go towards decentralized organization as well, down to the individual if possible. Now, y'all had a mutualist come on, and I'm a left market anarchist, which for me, that is different because mutualism already has a specific system to a degree in mind. It's very cooperatively based, but it doesn't really have a lot of room for modern ideas in there. Now, there's been neo-mutualism, which tries its best to kind of merge with Austrian economics, but it's still very collectivist to a degree. It still has this idea that people are kind of going to move in a more cooperative manner or be heavily involved with co-ops. Now, I'm personally involved with a co-op. Like I mentioned, Gray Man Design is a cooperative, but we try to move in a more individualistic manner. Now, the Earth doesn't really give a shit how we organize, but Gray Man Design is done in a manner in which every single person owns the company. It's not each person co-owns the company. Every single person is individually allowed to do whatever the hell they want inside that thing, inside that cooperative, inside that collective, whatever you want to call it. But we come together for different things, and we do things in a matter of consensus, not just the vast majority agreeing with it, but every single person has to agree with what we're doing moving forward, or they just say, I don't want to be involved with this decision, and I would give a shit, do whatever you want. But that being said, there is a thing that he talked about that's prevalent in mutualism that is necessary for Green Agorism. Now, as I said, Green Agorism uses counter-economics to try to get towards a more environmentally friendly world. And one of the major parts of mutualism, that's not necessarily in all of it, but is in the more traditional forms of it, is mutual credit. Now, mutual credit is not money in the way that we understand money. Mutual credit is essentially returning money to its roots, which is a simple means of trade, means of transaction, a means of if we don't have two things that we fundamentally agree have the exact same amount of value, then we can use this credit system to basically act as a stand-in for whatever we want, and we can agree that it is this number of credits or coins or dollars or whatever, and then we move on. The problem with that is a problem of the environment, and we are having a lot of issues with the way that we are mining gold and mining silver and creating dollars. Now, with dollars, a lot of people tend to think that it's paper money. It's not really. It's cotton-based, and it has a lot of other things in it. But at the same time, the way that we are gardening that way is still very harmful to the environment. We haven't really moved towards a more permaculture mindset. But mutual credit, because it doesn't require any kind of actual slip or anything, it's going to be a lot better for the environment. Essentially, mutual credit is the idea that everybody, you know what, I'll just give you guys an example
Sure.
of mutual credit. So say that everybody has their own like mini business. One person produces like shit. Like one person is a mechanic, one person is a computer engineer, blah blah blah. Different ideas. Say that somebody wants to trade. Let's see. Somebody wants to. No, let's avoid the business thing. Say somebody wants to trade a microwave or something, and this other person is a computer engineer. Well, the person trading the microwave doesn't really need their computer fixed, but everybody is set at 0 credit in this community with their different jobs and such. So because the person with a microwave that they're selling doesn't really care for a computer fixing, instead they sell it for 2 credits. So the computer engineer, rather than trading his services, gives 2 credits, and so now the person formerly with the microwave has plus 2 credits, but the person with the computer who fixes computers has negative 2 credits. And that's one of the great things about mutual credit. You can't technically run out. It works entirely as just a means of basically an IOU system, a very complicated IOU system. Well, now the person with the computer engineering ability wants to get their car fixed, but they have negative 2. The other person has positive 2. Shit, let me come at that.
Sure.
Sorry, this is what happens when you try and go onto a podcast a little bit high.
It's all good. It's interesting stuff.
All right. So say that the person who now has the microwave, who is a computer engineer, and the person who does cars want to do another trade, but the computer engineer has negative 2, the car person has positive 2. No, car person has 0. Fuck. The car person has 0. But the car person wants to buy the microwave from the person who has it. So he also sells it for 2 credits. So now he is back at 0, and the person with the car has negative 2, and that just kind of keeps on moving along until everybody's back at 0 credits again. And it can work in that way, or it can work in a little bit different ways. It entirely depends on the person who's in the community, or how the people inside the community want to operate that credit system.
So it's
now,
just
sorry once again for.
Oh, no worries. It's just an interaction tracker, pretty much, economic interaction tracker. Now, would it be based on something like blockchain, or how is this all recorded?
That would have been my question.
Mm-hmm. There's actually, glad you asked, there is a type of blockchain, not necessarily blockchain. There is a thing called the holochain, which is designed specifically for mutual credit. I personally am a big believer in the use of technology moving towards a decentralized society, which is why I tend to be involved with the solar punk communities. And I believe that using blockchain, using holochain, would be a really good way of doing stuff. The issue with blockchain as it currently exists is that big companies that already use massive amounts of state privilege, like subsidies or distinct protections or whatnot, can put in massive amounts into, say, Bitcoin or something, and then because they have such a massive amount in it, they can influence highly the market for Bitcoin and such.
Yeah.
With mutual credit, because everybody basically starts at 0, and there's not a way to put real money into it to get something out, it becomes a much more agorist-fueled market, because it's specifically for the people inside that community, and because it doesn't exist outside of between the people who are trading it, really. which is why I consider it to be potentially the most agorist form of money, because it can be entirely agorist centered, whereas Bitcoin, you can kind of jump in as a state actor, as a state capitalist, and mess around with it. You can't really do that with mutual credit, not to my knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that blockchain evolving, cryptos evolving. Eventually, if there's demand, people will create these kinds of things to
Yeah.
to help a decentralized mutual credit thing.
Yeah. And like I said, the reason why I consider that to be a very essential part of Green Agorism is simply the way that our mining of these different materials that we use for resource-based money systems heavily affects the environment. And moving towards something like this is going to be a lot easier in the long run. Now, that's not the only part of Green Agorism. Green Agorism is basically, it can be done by pretty much anybody, anybody who cares about that sort of thing. I've actually had an anarcho-communist who came to me asking me about Green Agorism and asking how I could participate. And so he's doing it to some extent. He and I were talking about potentially doing like a solar panel business where we're doing a little bit above cost, creating them ourselves rather than going through big companies to do it, because with massive companies trying to do things in a green manner, huge production typically involves huge energy, and huge amounts of energy, because we're not really at a point where everybody can be using green energy. Massive production of things typically requires things that harm the environment. So doing things on a more individual level is going to make things a lot easier. There's a thing that we talk about in the solar punk communities called the hierarchy of needs. And let me look at my chart to make sure that I have this right. 1 second. Okay, so the hierarchy of needs is a 6-tier pyramid. At the top is buying, next is making, thrifting, swapping, borrowing, use what you need. Very much involved with agorism is using what we already have on the planet and just kind of swapping that around in a way that's not producing things in a way that harms the environment. We're already seeing that private actors do a better job of what's the word I'm looking for? We have national parks and stuff that try to help the environment by sectioning off different areas. And we have seen, for example, that when it comes to protecting, let's say, like the bison, which has become a big thing as of recent, that private actors have done a job of like 10, 100 times better at saving these animals on a profit-based motive than the government has.
Sure.
Government just kind of fucks up what it tries to do. Now, depending on what you define profit as, I suppose you could say that I'm anti-profit because profit is essentially it's cost plus labor plus after that. Well, if I am interested in decentralization, I am hopefully decentralizing everything down to the individual. And that's what kind of makes me different from a mutualist. I like the idea of cooperatives. I think that they are moving in the right direction. But I think as technology evolves, we're going to be seeing a lot more individualized jobs and jobs where you don't need a massive group of like 100 people in a cooperative environment having their own businesses. Shit, what was I saying before? Remind me.
As far as profit in...
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, if I'm an individual actor, then I am my labor. So technically everything plus cost is really just income. It's really just return. Now I admit I'm not an economist by any factor. I have read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. I'm about halfway through it after rereading stuff because it's been a while. But to my knowledge of what profit is, I think that competition as people eventually move towards technology that is becoming more individualized, as competition grows, we will be having more of that. And we already see that with 3D printers and such. We're already making that move towards the point where an individual can produce for themselves without having to be a part of a large hierarchical company or a part of a cooperative, and still make a decent living off that sort of thing.
Yeah, sounds like a move towards entrepreneurship, as described by Konkin as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Work entrepreneurship is the term that I use normally.
Sure.
Another thing that's really important inside of Green Agorism, because Green Agorism is mostly about a change of tactics. So I believe the term that I'm looking for is guerrilla gardening. Have y'all heard of that before?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That is going to be a really big part of agorism. Now, agorism, as agorists, we have certainly more respect for the concept of property than I think that a communist would. It depends on what you define property as, of course. I tend to view it more in a labor-based style of manner, something that's kind of similar to Rothbard's homestead principle, but at the same time that has some mutualist tinges. And because of that, I don't really fit any kind of distinct system. And it's easier for me because I don't really believe in property rights. I certainly believe in property being a decent way to move things around. And I don't agree with some people in the solar punk community, which is what makes me more of a green agorist than a full-fledged solar punk. Because for the solar punk, the idea is that because capitalists use property in a way that's damaging, that it should be done away with if we're trying to save the environment, essentially, individualizing things past like a house or a toothbrush. But I don't think that because big capitalists are doing things in a certain way, that necessarily means that the premise of somebody owning something past exactly what they need is necessarily a bad thing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you don't believe in
a way to save the environment.
You don't believe in private property rights. Can you? So how does property work without property rights?
I guess the same way that technically currently does. My point more with that is that I don't believe that there is some certain gathering of ethereal beings that represent nature that is protecting my property for me. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad for individuals to have property, but at the end of the day, the things that protect property are your local community and yourself, and your ability to defend yourself, your ability to have other people come to your aid to defend you as well. And that doesn't necessarily require a state. That could be done with, let's say, a community. I don't know if militia is the right term, but I guess perhaps something akin to what Benjamin Tucker was talking about when he talks about having anarchists defending each other's property. And he specifically makes note that he didn't think that these groups of people would defend property that wasn't based in occupancy and use. So basically his premise was that occupancy and use would outcompete the other forms of property that we understand now as private property.
Right, absentee property and whatnot. Okay, I can get on board with that. That's what I was wondering, because that's the thing that I find the most frustrating when talking about rights is there is no, like you said, ethereal forces of nature that are going to materialize and defend these quote-unquote rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not sure like where that would have come from, because I'm personally a Quaker, which is probably really bad advertising because we're not supposed to be language or drinking, but I do both of those. I'm still learning. But even as a person who reads the Bible quite a bit, I have never found a section that describes rights specifically, that somebody has a right to blank. It says do not steal and it says do not murder, but that is different than saying you have a right to blank and you have a right to this and that. Simply saying don't do this is not the same as saying I have a right for you not to do this or something along those lines.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the golden rule, but put in a different term. You know, don't do to others what you wouldn't have done to you.
Absolutely.
Why doesn't somebody, because I'm sure that some listeners may not understand the concept of absentee ownership and why people disagree with that when it comes to property rights. Somebody want to elaborate on that?
Essentially, with absentee property, the issue that a lot of mutualists and left market anarchists have, left market anarchists being just kind of the umbrella term for mutualists, individualist anarchists, and more recently, agora syndicalists, which is a thing. We're actually going to be briefly having a panel on that at Agora along with Green Agorism. The issue that we tend to have with the premise of absentee ownership is not necessarily that we're trying to limit what people can own. We're just saying that the absentee property doesn't really have a basis outside of the state. If it can't be protected outside of the state, then it doesn't really count as property. Does that make sense? Or is that starting to lean into kind of statist territory?
I'm not following quite. If it's okay, so if it's protected outside of the state, it doesn't fall into property.
Let me see if I can state that in a different manner. Okay, so let's say that somebody gets a loan or something and pays the state to give them, let's say, 1,000 acres. They've never been on there. They've never added labor to it. It doesn't really fit the homestead principle. But according to the state, they have some paper that says that they own 1,000 acres.
Sure.
Now, there's no way that an individual person can be defending that claim because they haven't added any labor to it. There's nothing that, because property is, let me check and make sure that the official definition of property agrees with me. Okay.
Sure. Now, I'm prepared for the 1,000-acre argument because this is one I've rolled around quite a bit because I do want to get as much acreage as possible for myself and my wife in our endeavors, and I have some scenarios to throw at you once you're done with that.
I knew you'd take this one up.
The definition of property is exclusive right to possess, enjoy, and dispose of a thing. Something to which a person or business has the title, such and such. The definition of possess, it's hard to say that some individual can possess something like that. Like I can say that I possess a rifle because I use it regularly, I have it on me regularly, that sort of thing. But saying that I possess a certain area that I have never been to, that I only have the state's title and slip of paper to have as defense for it, it's hard to claim that as fitting with property because it's not something that I can technically exclusively possess. There's no way for me to defend it from every single individual who's going to walk along it. That's just not something that an individual person can do. I know that I said earlier that you can have like community who defends that sort of thing, but I don't believe, as Benjamin Tucker did, that they would recognize one individual's right to something that he never uses, that he's never walked on, that he doesn't intend to use, that sort of thing. Now, if somebody wants to live off in the middle of nowhere, between 1,000 with like 1,000 acres around them, and they use, let's say, like 5 acres in the middle of that, that's different, and let me explain why. The reason why I say that's different is because we currently utilize about 5% of the land in the United States, at least in the United States that I know of, for living space. And the main reason why people are not more spread out in that, I believe, is simply because of state power defending massive swaths of public property and massive swaths of land that does not fit the homestead principle and does not really fit any libertarian definition of property, but because the rich have, well, because the state capitalist technically has a title that is granted by the state that says that they own massive swath of forest or whatnot that they've never been on. They don't add any labor to, blah, blah, blah. That's the reason why people haven't spread out more. I believe that that's not something that needs to be defended as one person owns 1,000, and so that they don't get walked on and whatnot. I believe that people would naturally just spread themselves out a lot more because of the state no longer saying this is public property or this is private property according to the slip of paper, and thus you cannot go on it.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's less the extreme direction that I've faced before when talking about this. Being, let's say I did own 1,000 quote unquote own 1,000 acres, and the thing that's been brought to me is, well, you don't have the right to stop someone from coming onto that land and using it in an area that's not that you're not exclusively using. And there's a whole lot of things that go into, in my opinion, land ownership of a large area like that, like encouraging natural wildlife to be near for different reasons, hunting, that the fact that it's an ecosystem and you want to have a healthy ecosystem around your small ecosystem as well, among many other things. And there are ways, in my opinion, to defend that as a single family unit: dogs, guns, landmines, what have you. So that's where I lean more towards, I guess, that idea of property rights.
Yeah, and I understand that because Green Agorism is very much heavily concerned with the environment. And because of that, we want to have a world around us that is healthy and where the ecosystems are healthy. But I believe that a lot of the reasons why people feel that they need to have 1,000 acres is what you're saying, that they don't have people all kind of joining up, all gathering kind of in that area. But like I said, I feel like the vast majority of the reason people would want to do that is because they don't have enough room to move around.
Sure.
But when you have enough room to have a house every 100 acres or so off in the middle of the wilderness, there's not as much desire to be using it in an unsustainable manner.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's something that comes up in so many discussions of stateless philosophies, is that people drop these ideas into the middle of the current system where it would be a problem or where something wouldn't work, versus looking at it solely by itself and finding the path to that, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I'm very much a gradualist. I don't believe that we are going to get to anarchy tomorrow. I don't believe that we're going to get to a green, sustainable place tomorrow. That's why I'm working towards slowly changing the things around me. Slowly, I'm trying to get my yard into more of a garden. Slowly, I'm planning on eventually trying to get a better income in this area so that I no longer have to be using a car, which, although it's a very small amount of damage to the environment, very small, because I already have a car that's like pretty much electric. I'm planning on, once I have enough money from this area or from working remote, to build myself a bike out of like plastic and bamboo and some other stuff, recyclable material, so that I can be getting around and getting exercise and such. And I think that a lot of the reason why people drive these massive degrees is because of just lack of work, lack of ability to make work for yourself due to state regulation and such. and when we start moving towards a more free market society, I think that we're going to be having a lot less issue with these massive trucks and trains and whatnot spewing out massive amounts, because people aren't going to need to travel thousands and thousands of miles to get different places. And when we do, because there's going to be less people doing that for their daily commutes, we're going to be having to worry about the amount of emissions from, say, a train or a plane a lot less. And I think we're going to be also moving towards technology in which the train or plane itself is going to be a lot more sustainable.
Sure.
Yeah. I genuinely believe that the capitalist market, capitalist as defined by Konkin, in which it's a government essentially for and by big capital. I believe that they just kind of don't care as much because there are ways for them to buy themselves out of the damage that they're doing, or they're not directly affected by it. They're not directly affected by the pollution that they're putting into the water, which is getting into the local communities, not directly affected by the massive trash island the size of Texas that's out in the middle of things like that. And when we have a more free market, when the market is more led by individuals and communities who this sort of thing would affect, they're going to be looking for things that don't hurt them as much.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that
does absolutely make sense, and there could be incentives for traveling in that direction as well. So that's awesome.
There are also, but I think there's going to be a little bit less. Yeah.
Sure. Well, that's I think a pretty cool place to end it there. We're right at an hour. What is there anywhere, social media, anything like that, anything you want to direct people towards?
Because Green Agorism is a very new philosophy, the best place you can see something like it is off of Dr. Taryn P. Lupo's YouTube channel. He is the writer of a book called How to Make a Living Outside of the System. And he also has a lot of things about personal sustainability and that sort of thing, and food freedom. And that is the closest I can think to a place they can find information on it. As of right now, we're working on a Telegram channel called the Green Agora, which is going to be up soon, and doing a lot more stuff. But for now, I just suggest that listeners try to find certain ways in their area where they can move towards sustainability while also helping the counter economy.
It's a good message.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yep. And there's exciting happenings in the world of agorism that we'll keep everyone abreast of when it's time. All right, guys. That was awesome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, man. I really enjoyed listening to all that. I learned a lot.
Cool. Thanks.
Awesome. We'll see y'all next time.